Okay, so do apologize for the time that Jeff has shown up. Jeff, it was a 2:10 start, not 2.
So you guys, how do you want to divide you have 30 minutes, how do you want to divide it?
Yeah, so I think it'd be best if Jeff holds up.
No, definitely.
Yeah, so if we did 15 minutes conversation, I guess 15.
Well, I'll introduce Jeff then. Jeff D'aANDRADE is a professor of education at San Francisco State, and he is the director of Roses in Concrete, this new progressive, almost experimental, except it's beyond experiment. It's a grade school, it's growing, and it's up to the 5th grade now, I believe.
Sixth grade.
Is it 5th or 6th?
Sixth.
6th already. And so they're growing it next year to the 7th grade and 8th. They're going to have the whole deal. The site, the campus, is an old school that they're redoing. So there's a lot of design work that needs to be done. Just partly because it's old, but also because they have such a different vision of what education should be. So the form, the planning needs to be different too. And, it's an exciting opportunity for you to get sort of in on the ground level of something new and really good. Thank you guys for responding to the new time constraints.
What's going on, everybody? That's how y'all agree to guess? And a Berkeley grad, 3 times over. Let's try again. How y'all doing? Yeah, that sounds about like my high school class. Give me 1 second. I'm going to pull up. Is the audio relative aging right?
Jeffrey's in 103, you guys, if you want me to go there.
No audio. Okay, so while we wait on the audio, first of all, thank you for having us back again. Last year we were here, did a similar presentation, and then 3 of the groups ended up coming to Roses and doing their project at Roses. And Brian actually just sent me them. And they're incredibly impressive. Brian said it took him, what did you say, 9 weeks? 9 weeks to read them all. It took me 9 minutes because I started opening them and I was like, oh my God, it's gonna make my head explode. So I hope to read them tip to finish at some point. But it's just sort of like classic Berkeley work. Just a deep treatment of and honoring of both this space and this class, and then bringing the knowledge that you all are acquiring here into a community space and treating it with that level of respect. So I really respect the rigor that your students brought into our space. So I'm going to give you a quick backdrop on this documentary film that you're going to watch a clip from, just to kind of frame up a little history of the school. So this documentary film was made by a British filmmaker from London who was doing a project in the US where he was filming highly successful teachers in high poverty urban environments. And most of his filming was being done on the East Coast. So he was in like DC, Baltimore, Philly, and he was going and doing these film projects with each of these teachers, and every time he went to a classroom, the teacher was talking, literally mentioned roses in concrete and some of my research. And just as a point of correction, I'm not actually in the College of Education, San Francisco State. I'm in the College of Ethnic Studies. And so I have a joint appointment in the College of Ed, but my tenured appointment is actually in Ethnic Studies, in Rasa Studies. This happened frequently enough for him that eventually he reached out to me. And he said, hey, you know, your name keeps coming up, and on my way back to London, I'm actually flying through San Francisco. Can I come for a visit? So I was like, yeah, sure. So he comes for a visit to the school, which is located in Deep East Oakland. And I give him a school tour, and he's there for about 90 minutes. And at the end of the tour, we're standing out on the porch of the school, and he says, I've never seen anything like this before. And I would be willing to cancel my trip home, or delay my trip home, if you would allow me to make this my top project. And that's not actually my decision. We're a community school, which means that I am the founder and the board chair, but that doesn't mean I get to make like blanket executive decisions. So first of all, I told him that I was humbled by the fact that he thought that highly of the school, but that he would then need to bring that proposal to our community. So he canceled his flight home, extended his trip, and he did. He talked to families, he talked to young people, he talked to our staff, and they said, yeah, that we would allow you to do that. His artistic style is one where he does feature-length documentary films, but he does them using a style of vignettes. So he tells the story of a place through the lens of multiple people that sort of live and work and occupy that place. So this is the first vignette that was released from the film. He's about to release the second one. And when I go to talk to people about the school, I feel like in terms of just the capturing of the spirit of Roses in Concrete, this vignette actually does it pretty well. So rather than me trying to narrate the school and how it came about and what we're trying to do, I'm just going to play this documentary film vignette, and then we'll open it up for an opportunity to have some dialogue and respond to your questions. Be good on the audio?
You should be.
Yeah, that's fine. Quietest drum that I've ever heard.
Yeah. Check out the machine. Just a second. Sorry, guys.
How you want to use this time? You want to talk a little bit, Brian, about some of your work? Are there any questions? Yeah, go ahead. In the back.
You've talked about this school, or you and Galen has introduced you as talking about the school as a new way of something, doing education in a new way. Can you talk about community management, or what is different about the school? I mean, I guess the video will introduce some of that, but what's the background for your school's new approach to a better way of doing education?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, both from the research community and the practice community and philanthropy, think that we're a new school. I actually don't. I actually don't think we're particularly innovative. In a lot of ways, I feel like we're old school. old school in that we understand that our responsibility as a public school is first and foremost to the most vulnerable youth and families in our community. And then secondly, we understand that at the end of the day, teaching and learning always boils down to one thing, and one thing only, and that's relationships. So and I feel like when we were much more community-oriented in our public school orientation, those were the things that were really being talked about and focused on. We weren't talking about kids as numbers. We weren't talking about test scores. We weren't even debating the value of investing in public schools, right? So we're a bit of a return, a bit of a throwback to valuing children, valuing families, valuing relationships, and understanding that the role of a public school is not to laud itself with the number of children that it sends to elite institutions, that the role of public school is to create a critical, civically engaged democracy, and to create a group of young people who understand that they have both a community and a moral obligation to uphold the principles of a pluralistic, multiracial democracy. And the kind of counterbalance to this is, I think about, if you look at the names and the educational histories of the people that were named as directly responsible for the collapse of the banking industry and the collapse of the housing industry, they went to the nation's most elite universities. They're Ivy League, Berkeley, Stanford type grads. Okay? So something is fundamentally wrong with our education system when the graduates from the most elite universities lack a moral compass. Their moral compass was so fucked up they couldn't even find the parking lot from here. And yet they're our elite. They're our most quote-unquote educated citizens in this society. And so for us, it's about recentering a purposeful question around why do we even have public schools in this nation? Why are we taking children away from their families for 8 hours a day for 13 years in consecutive order in their most developmental years, right, outside of the 0 to 5 pocket? Why are we doing that? If what it's producing is a group of highly schooled individuals who lack the moral and cultural sensibilities that an educated population should have. So in some ways, I think when people come to Roses and Concord, they're like, wow, like you guys are really doing things very differently. In some ways we are, given the current landscape of public schools, particularly public schools that are serving poor kids and kids of color. But in the grander history of things, I think we're actually very much aligned with the historical community school and its focus on developing young people first and foremost that have a real critical civic sensibility about themselves. Other questions? I saw a couple other hands. Y'all have the same question?
But you have some special things about being bilingual and you speak in 2 languages also. That's a little special.
Yeah, we're so there's 3 special characteristics to the school. One is that we're a dual language school. So we're half the school day instruction is in Spanish and half the school day instruction is in English. Dual language schools are increasingly popular in the U.S. However, we are the only dual language school in the United States that we are aware of. I don't know all the dual language schools in the United States, but we're the only one that I'm aware of whose student population is 50% black and 50% Latino. And we thought we were the only dual language school in the country that was 50% black. And then we found out about a set of schools in St. Louis that are dual language of 50% black. But the other half of the population is around 35% affluent white, which is what we see in a lot of dual language schools around the country, that more and more white families, middle class and wealthy Asian families are accessing the dual language component, but there's almost never language instruction for black youth. The second special characteristic is that we're a full-blown visual and performing arts school. So every kid every day gets visual and performing arts from kinder on up. And then if they have special arts interests, then they can do deeper dives into those things in the after-school program. We teach everything from ballet to hip-hop to modern to jazz. Kids learn 7 different instruments. They learn 7 different forms of dance, including the ones I just listed off, but also they learn danza azteca and they learn West African dance. They learn how to choreograph both music, dance, and full-blown performances. We make all of our own costumes, we make all of our own sets, and then they're also exposed to a whole range of different visual arts through our visual arts program. And then the third special characteristic is that we're a lab school. So we have partnerships with every major Bay Area university, including this one, that look at and study different elements of our school and our practice. And the intention there is not to say that we're doing anything necessarily better than anybody else, but to say that the tools of research can be used to better understand what works, how it works, and why it works, and then use that to begin to disseminate into both other schools in Oakland, but around the country. And the idea there is that a lot of the logic that's driving decisions that's being made in public schools is being made primarily by corporations. And specifically, textbook companies like Pearson and Holt Mifflin and a lot of the folks that influenced, if you went to U.S. public schools, they made a lot of decisions about what you were learning, when you were learning it, how it was being assessed. And we really believe that the community, if it's a public institution, the community should really be deciding what children are learning, what's being emphasized, what's being valued, and you can easily scale those up to like Common Core standards. But that's not what's happening mostly in schools, and so we want to use the tools of research to really influence both policy and practice so that communities have a greater say over what children are learning. You good?
No.
Yes.
See if it's a computer.
And so you mentioned the demographics of your school, and like personally in my family, I have a younger sister who's going to school in Oakland, and one of the things that my family kind of deals with and struggles with is the fact that a lot of her teachers tend to be like these like really young, white, usually come from like an affluent background teachers, a lot of them do like Teach for America, things like that. For teaching for the very first time, like I've never been in a classroom with students of color before. I'm wondering how your school tries to step away from that, or if they do.
Yeah, so we have almost 100% staff of color, both from our teaching staff, right, up to our support staff, up to our school leadership. So part of it is like we have a national reputation, so we literally like people relocate. We've had teachers relocate from DC, from Baltimore, from New York, from Jersey, to come and work at Rose's because of that, right? Because of both because oftentimes if you're a teacher of color, you're the teacher of color, right? I mean, the national data on teaching is 86% of the national teaching force is white, 84% is female. And who's doing the worst in school? Boys of color, right? And this is not to say that if we suddenly had like this massive influx of like males of color in teaching, that suddenly like boys of color would be like doing amazing in school, but sure as hell matters, right? That as you're saying with your younger sibling, that she or he, right, can like just visually connect, like, oh, like there's an immediate connection there for me. This doesn't mean that like white teachers can't be effective with kids of color. In the same way I would say that it doesn't mean that teachers of color can't be effective with white kids. But the fact that 86% of our national teaching force is white, while over 50% of our public school attendees are non-white and growing every year. And in California, that number is exponentially higher. I think it's like, well, it's not exponentially, but it's like close to 76, 77% of students in California public schools are students of color. That misalignment is way too radical. So one of the things that we do with our labs, we lab around 3 things. We lab around curriculum, we lab around pedagogy, and we lab around people. So in every single classroom led by a teacher of color, there's also teaching apprentices of color. So part of our model is to grow our own teachers. And we won't be able to hire all those teachers, so we're also trying to then impact the broader conversation in the district about the fact that there's not a lack of desire on the part of people of color to go into teaching. So that means there must be something structural that is interrupting our pathway into that profession. And so part of that structure is literally just a lack of a pathway and mentorship in, right? So it's when you go to school and almost all, if not all your teachers are white, your sense that you could become a teacher or that you would even want to become a teacher is reduced, right? But if you can see yourself in the profession, then it's much more likely that you get some early mentorship and begin to have some conversation about pathway work into the profession. So if you came to Roses, you would see almost 100% staff of color, and you would also see a lot of apprenticeship and mentorship going on to expand that number beyond the borders of our school. Come on, y'all, got to keep going because he has not figured it out yet. Yeah.
I guess, like, are there any physical features about the design of the school that influence or enhance your teaching?
Yeah, it's a really good question, especially given the classroom, right? So we were just having some, Brian and a couple of our leadership team were just having some conversation about some of the design work we want to do on the school and some longitudinal planning around perhaps even doing some new build. And one of the things that one of our co-principals was saying, so it's his first year at Roses, and he was coming from another school, another public school actually in Berkeley. And he was talking about the fact how fundamentally different the spaces are at Roses, and it's not actually the architectural structure, but it's the ownership that we give teachers over their classrooms. And so he said, you know, you go into space after space after space in Roses, and you feel Roses. Like, you can see our cultura, right? You can see it both in the language and in the color and in the art. So, and the great thing about having a really strong arts program is that you get free decoration. So one of the things that our art teacher does is that every single child every year builds an art portfolio. And at the end of the year, they can donate elements of their art portfolio to the school. And so our school is largely decorated by the art of our students, and we have an incredible number of community artists, many of whom are actually parents at our school, that will like throw pieces up right on walls or will volunteer to come in and do muraling projects. So our school, like just base architecturally, looks like a whack Oakland school, right? It's got portables, it's got an ancient main building. It looks like a school. But when you walk inside spaces, then you really begin to feel the presence of our cultura in the way in which we then own those spaces. And then how we use the spaces is also reflective of a very different approach to school. So the number of times when you'll see young people doing cross-age work, right? So the fifth graders are responsible for the kindergartners. And it's not in a kind of like, I don't know, like passe, you know, almost Pollyannish way. It's like, no, you're actually responsible for that kid. If that kid gets hurt on the playground, you're going to be the one who we're talking to, right? Because you are your brother's keeper. You are your sister's keeper. This is either a community or it's not. And if it's, a lot of schools talk about being a community. They talk about being a family. They talk about, look, I'm the youngest of 7 kids. And if something happened to me as the baby, my older brothers and sisters were getting it. And, you know, I grew up in a family that spent a lot of time in the streets. And when stuff really started to pop off, my brothers and sisters would literally send me home. And you know, part of it was because I was the chosen one in the family, but part of it too was because they didn't want to catch the wrath of my mom. If I got locked up and I was with them, there wasn't nothing the court system could do to my brothers and sisters compared to what my mom was going to do. So I wanted to replicate, but when I went to school, I was on my own. I mean, I had my homies, but like there was no adult messaging that there was any responsibility on my part for the other youth in the school or on their part for me. And so school became very much this for me, right? I mean, I think about it all the time. I just got back from Chula Vista, doing some work down on the border with their schools. I do work with schools all over the country. And the number of times I go into elementary schools, And I'm talking about like 7, 8-year-olds, where y'all taking an exam, okay? You're taking an exam. And you have the answers, okay? And she doesn't. And we're talking about 3rd grade, y'all with me? Okay. And what is she? What's your name? Kylie? Okay. What is Kylie if she gives the answers to, what's your name? Amy. A cheater. Just trip on that. This 8-year-old is a cheater if she helps the homie Amy. She has knowledge, she has information. And if she gives it to her, she's a cheater. We're messaging that to 8-year-olds. So I'm going into 3rd grade classrooms where I'm literally watching 8-year-olds next to their neighbor doing this. Literally covering up information. That's what we're norming in school. How is that good for either one of them individually, for the neighborhood, for the community, or for the society? How is that good? Like, you can't, it's a false rigor, right? So, and I'm not just saying that you should just like give her the answers. That's not what I'm saying, right? But I'm saying you have a responsibility. If you know some shit that she doesn't, you have a responsibility to share that with her. But we've created a paradigm where the only information sharer is this dude, okay? Which then completely, right, socializes everybody else into a relationship to knowledge where you don't have any knowledge and you don't have any knowledge. I got the knowledge, right? And I'll give it to you, and then I'll recall it. And you have no responsibility around how you use that knowledge with the person next to you, and that's how we get people that use all this knowledge to create exploitive lending practices, right? Exploitive social practices, exploitive food practices, etc., etc., etc. I indict public schools in that. Right? If we had a different messaging, okay, so in our school, if you do that to her, you'll get it. Because we're saying that everybody goes to 4th grade or nobody goes to 4th grade. So if you're an A student and the person next to you is flunking, you're flunking. You cannot be excellent as a student if you do not know how to share the information that you have. And we call that overstanding. If y'all, any hip-hop heads in here? No hip-hop? What is happening in Berkeley? No? All right, well, if you don't have to be a hip-hop head to listen to Goody Mob. Okay? Goody Mob stands for the good die mostly over bullshit. And Goody Mob has this thing that they talk about as overstanding. And overstanding is when you understand so well that you understand your obligation to teach others what you understand. And so our goal is to create young people that overstand. First, right, you gotta have the discipline and the commitment to understanding the material yourself. But once you do, you have a second-tier obligation to then teach that to others. Right? And then you become an overstander.
We're good?
We're good. I was running out of shit to say. Okay, so in 1 minute? Okay,
Yeah, so
all bad. Here's what we'll do. We will share this link because there's so much hype out there. I know some of y'all are going to watch this and go, oh, I got to see the video. So we'll send you the link to this, and then we'll communicate with you on how you can get involved if you choose to.